What would you do if your life savings vanished overnight? In 1931, that nightmare became reality for millions of Europeans when Austria's largest bank collapsed, the first domino that would bring the continent to its knees. While everyone remembers America's breadlines and Wall Street chaos, what did Europe's Great Depression look like? Cities that had barely recovered from World War I now faced a new enemy: complete economic devastation. Over the course of the crisis, 1 in 5 workers lost their jobs, banks collapsed, and European trade plummeted by over 66%. But what caused Europe to spiral from post-war recovery into financial ruin? Buckle up as we uncover the chaos and economic turmoil behind Europe's Great Depression. Let's start. In the early 1920s, Europe was a continent rebuilding from the ashes of World War I. Having to reconstruct factories, farms, and homes, Europe's industry lagged behind an increasingly productive United States. The average U.S. factory worker now produced twice as much per hour as their European counterpart. World War I had also left economies shattered by debt from reparations obligations and would see traumatized populations with hunger and hyperinflation. Desperate for stability and recovery, European nations leaned heavily on help from Uncle Sam. With American banks becoming Europe's ATM, the Dawes Plan of 1924 restructured German reparations and opened the floodgates of U.S. loans into Europe. The U.S. lent out $4 billion to Germany, and Europe as a whole received roughly $7.8 billion between 1924 and 1930. While American money propped up Europe, currency stability became the holy grail. The nightmare of early 1920s hyperinflation in the Weimar Republic was seared into public memory. A moninga? Just taking my salary to buy a loaf of bread? Sorry, the price just doubled while you walked here. How about now? Tripled during our conversation. See this? Unlike paper that you can print endlessly, gold is finite. You can't just make more of it. Our marks became wallpaper, but this has held its value for centuries. No printing press can devalue it. Well, back to the gold standard then. Yes, a mark backed by gold can never become worthless. The shared fixation for consistency and stability drove a return to the gold standard. By the mid-1920s, Britain, France, Italy, and many others tied their currencies to gold, hoping to create financial trust. But this stability came at a cost. To maintain gold pecs, governments had to balance budgets, suppress wages to keep labor costs matching falling prices, and hike interest rates if gold flowed out. These rigid rules proved crippling during crises, effectively handcuffing Europe as disaster loomed. Yet despite these challenges, parts of Europe saw prosperity. In the Roaring '20s, factories hummed in Berlin and Paris. Germany grew through U.S. loans. France rebounded after the stabilization of its franc. Europe's recovery remained fragile, hindered by farm overproduction, shaky banks, and war debts. However, this fragile recovery wouldn't last, and in 1930, things would take a turn for the worse. When America sneezes, the rest of the world catches a cold. In October 1929, Wall Street crashed, and the shockwave hit Europe hard. U.S. investors and banks, filled with fear, began calling in their loans. Europe lost its American lifeline that it had come to heavily rely on. Time to pay up, folks. But I just used your loans to pay France, and I'll use that to pay Britain, who used it to pay you. As economic uncertainty set in, nations scrambled to save themselves, and in 1930, America fired the first shot, with the Smoot-Hawley Act slamming the door on European goods. Europe retaliated in a panic. France imposed quotas on over 3,000 products. Germany hiked tariffs by 50%, and even Britain, the champion of free trade for 85 years, abandoned its stance. The world shut down in hostile economic blocks. For everyday farmers and miners, it was a death sentence. And just when things looked like they couldn't get any worse, European banks began to fall. In May 1931, Credit Anstalt, Austria's mighty financial pillar, announced insolvency. Alarm bells rang throughout the continent. If big banks could fail, who was safe? Depositors stormed branches demanding money that wasn't there, which created bank runs. By July 1931, Germany's Danit Bank collapsed. By summer 1931, the Hungarian national bank's depleted foreign exchange reserves forced the government to suspend both bond redemptions and foreign interest payments. Austria, are you good? I just need a moment. Tell me you're still liquid. I'm not technically insolvent if no one checks. Nations faced a nightmare. Stick to the gold standard, where the currency remained stable, but governments couldn't stimulate the economy during hard times and were required to raise interest rates, cut spending, and crush wages to defend the currency. Alternatively, they could abandon the gold standard for a floating currency, allowing the central bank to adjust interest rates and the money supply freely to stimulate the economy, but at the risk of excessive money printing and high inflation. Many countries, including Germany, chose to maintain the gold standard. At first, Germany's Chancellor Heinrich Brüning became the grim symbol of this era. He slashed unemployment benefits, raised taxes, and cut wages, all while 6 million Germans lost their jobs. His policies strangled the economy. Industrial output plunged by 40%. People called him the Hunger Chancellor. Desperate citizens listened to new voices, communists promising revolution, Nazis vowing revenge. It seemed that a continental crisis was inevitable. Britain entered the 1930s already wounded. Its coal, steel, and shipbuilding industries were decaying. When the Depression hit, unemployment soared to 20%, or over 2.5 million people. The Gero March of 1936 saw endless columns of jobless men march 300 miles to London and became a symbol of a nation's despair. However, here's where Britain's story diverged from that of the continent. In September 1931, with gold reserves bleeding away, it made the unthinkable decision. It abandoned the gold standard. The pound sank like a stone, dropping 23% after leaving gold. The national government coalition slashed interest rates to historic lows. Reluctantly, it also abandoned free trade, shielding its industries that were hit with tariffs, while favoring trade within the empire, allowing exports to recover. These moves, combined with a cheaper pound, slowly stabilized the British economy, while extremists seized power elsewhere on the continent. Britain's institutions bent but didn't break. The same couldn't be said for Germany and Italy. The two countries walked parallel paths into darkness, marked by economic ruin, democratic collapse, and rebirth through dictatorship. Germany suffered immensely. By 1932, unemployment reached 6 million, nearly a third of the workforce. In industrial towns, half the workforce idled. Chancellor Brüning's austerity had backfired catastrophically. Extremist Nazis and communists dominated elections. In January 1933, Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Democracy died within months. The Nazis poured money into rearmament and propaganda projects, the Autobahn, highways, tanks, and fighter planes. By 1936, unemployment vanished on paper, but workers now labored for the state, building instruments of war.